Uh, okay, I would like to welcome you here. Uh, Dear students, Prof. Vijay Bhatia, MA PhD, is a professor in Department of English College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences, City University of Hong Kong. So it is a good time for us here to listen to Prof. Vijay Bhatia point of view on the topics presented for the 3 days, consecutive days. I hope that you will enjoy and can do something on your next research dealing with this topic. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome Prof. Vijay Bhatia to do the presentation. Prof. Vijay, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Soyan. Let me actually share my screen. Okay, can you see the screen? Hello?
Yes, Prof.
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
you can
Prof. We
see it.
can see that.
Okay,
Okay.
right. Okay, let's begin. Thank you very much for a very generous introduction and welcoming me. And it's a pleasure to be in Indonesia after a long, long time. You know, I remember when I came there, it was long time ago from Singapore. After that, I haven't been able to come. But this is a virtual trip, so I don't mind at all, so long as we are in touch with each other. Right. Okay, now in the two lecture series, today and tomorrow, this is for the audience. I don't know exactly what are the who are the people actually, but I assume that you will probably have some understanding or maybe a little bit of an awareness of genre theory or genre analysis, but I don't assume any background knowledge on your part, simply because I know there will be some people who may not have any idea about genre analysis. So what I want to do is today I will introduce genre analysis, what we mean by genre, genre analysis, how do we define it, how different people have defined it. And then secondly, I will analyze a few examples in detail so that you know how it works. So there'll be a little bit of theory, but mostly on analysis, which most of you will be able to understand. And I hope, and I'm sure most of you will be familiar with the kinds of analyses I'm going to do or the kinds of texts I'm going to analyze. Right then, let's go. Now, when it comes to defining genre, John Swales, who I worked with in the 80s in Birmingham, he was my PhD supervisor. I was doing my thesis, and we also worked on legal genres and academic genres. Now, later on, he wrote the book in 1990, where he defines genre as follows. A genre comprises a class of communicative events. Now, communicative events means any event where two people or three people or one person communicates. It may be in writing, it may be in speech, it may be on video, or it may be audio or any kind of medium. And it's a class of communication. We are not talking about one particular text or one particular event. It's a class. So many examples of the same communicative event. So it's a group of communicative events, and the members who participate in this, they have a common understanding of the communicative purpose of that communication. When they communicate, talk to each other, they have a common purpose and they are aware of it. And that awareness or sharing is very important for us. Now, these purposes are recognized by expert members of the parent discourse community and thereby constitute the rationale for the genre. So these communicative purposes are the way we define genre. We identify genre because they actually provide the rationale. Let us disambiguate it a little bit further, they share. The first thing is that the members of the community, for example, if you think of newspaper writing, or newspaper genres, or news reports, then of course the members of the community. Now, who is the community? There are journalists, there are educated people who regularly read newspapers and news reports, and there are some people who probably are beginners. But those people who are actually part of the community, who have been there reading newspaper reports, looking at newspaper reports on a regular basis, they are the members of a community. And when you are actually a member of what he calls discourse community, then of course you know what we mean by news reports. You have some certain expectations. You share with the writer, what exactly do we expect the news reports to be about and how these are written. So it provides some kind of a rationale, some kind of an understanding of genre. How do we recognize the integrity of the genre through communicative purpose? The rationale, which means the communicative purpose, it shapes the schematic structure of discourse. Schematic structure, the way it is put together, the way it is organized rhetorically, and it gives them a little bit of shape, a flexible shape, but still quite um, conventional, quite standardized of discourse. It influences and it constrains the choice of content and style. And how it is written, always keeping in mind what the other people who are reading it, what the other people are expecting from you. So you have to, when you are involved in any kind of genre writing, then you have to be aware of the communicative purpose, and your style should be in keeping with the kind of style and the kind of content, the kinds of things you can talk about, the kinds of things you can't talk about. For example, if you're talking about newspaper reports, then most of the people who are involved in writing, the journalists, they know what the readers are going to expect. They know they cannot use anything that they like. They have to report facts. They have to see what is available in the world outside, what is it that they have witnessed, and they have to report it exactly that way. So these are the expectations, and they try to meet those expectations. And the communicative purpose, therefore, is both a privileged criterion. This is the main criterion. Of course, there are other possibilities like, there could be who are the people who are writing it, who are the people, in what kind of situation you read and write, and what kind of, you say, style you write in. So all these things are there. They are important, but the privilege, the most important actually criterion for identifying genre is the communicative purpose. And it forces people, the writers particularly, and even the readers, informed readers, I'm saying, the members of the discourse community, to look at it in a particular way so that they can actually focus on comparable rhetorical action. Rhetorical action means the way you write it, the discursive event, the way you write it, how do you organize it. So they narrowly focus on the way news reports are written, or they narrowly focus on the way research articles are written by academics, or the way law reports are written by lawyers. So anything which is identified on the basis of a communicative event or communicative purpose as an instance of a genre, it has all kinds of constraints. Now, by the way, this is not the only definition we have in the community. That is one definition which is given by Swales. Now, Caroline Miller, oh, sorry, it is not 1884, it is 1984. Sorry for the typo. Now, she is also a genre analyst, but she comes from America, and the American tradition is slightly different from what John Swales and I did in Britain. So there is a, the UK version of genre, and there is an American version of genre. And she describes genre as a conventional category of discourse, a conventional. We are talking about conventions even in Swales' work. That is what people share. Category of discourse based in large-scale typification of rhetorical action. Typification is the term now typically used by members of a particular community, which amounts to the same thing, that all those people who share rhetorical purposes, they share the communicative purpose. Here, they are talking about the rhetorical action. Action is the same as, discursive action. You can write it, you can do things, and you can write it in any medium. So that is typical of a discourse community. So typical of, for example, I talked about the journalists. It is typical of journalists to write newspaper reports in a particular way. So that is how we identify it. And it acquires meaning from situation and from the social context in which situation arose. So they actually bring in the situation or the social context. So that is the second definition, the way it is distinguished by Caroline Miller. Similarly, at the same time in Australia, Jim Martin defines genres in his own way. And he comes from systemic functional linguistics, and he is he's a grammarian, he is a linguist, less of discourse analysis, but he defined genre as a staged, goal-oriented social process. Again, he talks about social process, whereas John Swales talks about a community purpose, a discourse community. He says the social purpose, it's much wider. But at the same time, it is goal-oriented, which simply means it has certain communicative purposes to achieve. And it is done in different stages. We'll talk about those stages. We'll talk about those rhetorical organization a little bit later. Now, this means essentially that when looking at genre, we are especially interested in the way they achieve their social purpose, which they usually do in more than one step. So they go a little bit further. They talk about the steps that people normally take in order to organize if you think of the newspaper report, in that case, I think the similar example, same example you take, then of course there are certain steps, certain stages. The steps are, you have to have a headline, then you have actually the summary of that, and then the events one after the other, and that's how it goes. It's all done in stages. So if you compare now the three definitions, if you compare the three definitions, what we can summarize, what we can actually find common ground is it's an investigation of situated linguistic behavior. It is linguistic behavior. We're talking about language. Now, language may be spoken, it may be written, it may be visual, it may be recorded, or whatever, can be medium you can think of, but it is situated in a particular situation. So it can be defined as a typification of rhetorical action, as the Americans did, or it could be regularities of staged, goal-oriented social processes, as did Martin, or it may be consistency of communicative purpose. But if you think of the common ground, one of the things which comes out very clearly is that most of the people who participate in this kind of genre, which is either a rhetorical action or a rhetorical or social goal achievement or any other kind of communicative event, it is conventional, it is standardized to a large extent. How do we see it is as standardized? That means if there are 50 people or 100 people or thousands of people in the world who write newspaper reports in different parts of the world, in different countries, in different media houses, most of them more or less write the same way because there are conventions. there is common understanding. How come all these people actually write the same way? And how come all over the world people expect, the readers expect the same kind of genre from these people? Now that is what we call, it is typical, it is regular, it is consistent. Whether you look at rhetorical action, or whether you look at the social process, or whether you look at the communicative purpose, the consistency, the repetition, the common element is that the whole community, the members of the community, all the members of the community, they think alike. They share these purposes, they share this rhetorical action, they share social processes and goals. So that is actually, in nutshell, what genre is all about. So it is a communicative event which is standardized, conventionalized to a large extent, which is typical of a particular discourse community or a particular, community, or for a particular social process, and to achieve certain goals and communicative purposes. So that's how genre analysis is defined and understood. Now let us look at a more general scenario now. Take any particular text. It can be viewed as just a text. For example, if you take an essay written by a student, or a research article written by an academic, or a textbook written by a textbook writer, it can be seen as a text, which means it has certain way of organizing. It has words and phrases, paragraphs, and meanings associated with that, right? So the organization and everything is part of the text. So it can just be considered as text, and you can analyze text as such. You don't have to go beyond it if you are analyzing this as a text. But at the same time, it is possible to see any of these events, any of these examples, whether it is a newspaper report or whether it is a textbook or a research article or a student essay, can be considered as a genre, because it is meant to achieve a specific communicative purpose. A student essay, when they write it as a genre. There are fixed ways of writing an essay, and you're doing it to achieve, to kind of write an essay for examination or for submission to your teacher. And you have some understanding of what the teacher expects, and the teacher has some understanding of what the students are expected to write. So you share this kind of understanding, which is part of the classroom work that you do. Similarly, textbooks. A textbook writer knows how to do it, how to write a textbook, what is the purpose of the textbook, in what way he can or she can actually write so that the students can understand it, what is the relationship between the reader and the writer, the students and the textbook writer. The same goes for any other kind of text, any other example that you can take. In addition to that, you can go a little bit further and you can look at it, the same thing. You can look at it as part of professional practice. Student essay is part of academic practice in the university. Textbook is part of academic practice in the university education system. The authors, they are part of the profession, and they have certain practices, they have certain ways of doing things. So textbook can be part of professional practice. You can go even further and broadly think of a textbook as coming from a particular professional culture. For example, a textbook in accounting will reflect accounting culture, the culture of the people who actually are experts in accounting. If you take a legal textbook, it will reflect, to some extent, legal culture. So the writer of the textbook, the writer of the research article, they are all familiar with, and they're part of this professional culture. The professional culture is some kind of a mindset. Every discipline has its own professional culture. Every discipline has its own mindset. If you think about it, then of course you can actually compare how the accountants think about their job and how the lawyers think about their job, how the marketing person thinks of their job, because they have their own mindset, different mindsets. But when you look at this kind of analysis, then at the bottom end, you have the text. But as you move up, you are moving towards context. The context is defined in one sense as genre or as professional practice or professional culture. They provide the context in which the text is written, the text is interpreted, the text is analyzed, the text is reacted to. The uptake of the text depends on these contextual factors. On the other hand, if you look at it, when you talk about text and part of the genre, you are talking about discourse. Now, making a distinction between text and discourse. Discourse is the value of a particular text. A text is a physical representation of words, phrases, sentences, paragraphs, and chapters and things of that kind. But when you think of a genre, you are talking more about not one particular kind of text, but a kind of entity which we are familiar with, a textbook. And the moment you analyze it, you consider this as professional practice, in addition to genre and text, you are studying performance, how people perform, how the textbook writer performs. How does he do it? And that is an important aspect of any kind of analysis, And if you go even further and talk about professional culture, then you're talking about the identification of the writer as a valid member of a particular professional culture, an effective and useful and successful member of a particular community. For example, textbook writer. If a textbook writer writes a very good textbook, which is very successful, to a large extent, it will reflect the disciplinary culture, the disciplinary mindset. Now, it is a different matter these days because you do have nowadays interdisciplinary textbooks. But let us not go into that. We will talk about these maybe perhaps at some other time. So considering this kind of understanding, I developed a model for discourse analysis, model for genre analysis in 2004, where I said you can actually have a textual perspective, means simply look at the text and you want to analyze it. Analyze discourse as text, and you are within a textual space. You operate within the space which is provided. That means a text which is given to you. So you actually look at the whole paragraph, the complete paragraphs, or complete textbook, or a complete research article, or maybe perhaps any other thing, or even a kind of research article, or maybe perhaps your student essays that you write, or reports that you write. And in order to understand that, in order to analyze it, you need textual knowledge, knowledge of the language, knowledge of the way sentences are written, the knowledge of the way sentences are put together into paragraphs, the knowledge of the semantics, the meaning system of language, how meaning is reflected in language. So you do look at all these things. But the moment you go to the higher level, then I have combined the two, the professional practice and discourse as genre, because they have a shared understanding. They operate within what I call socio-pragmatic space, which is not simply social, but also pragmatic, because people do actually manipulate in order to be effective, manipulates resources that you have, linguistic resources you have. How do you actually make use of language? Not everybody will write. If you're thinking of, newspaper reports, then all the reporters do not write exactly the same way, although they have the same conventions, but they write differently. They want to be innovative. They want to be more effective, and everybody has his or her own style of writing. So there is a bit of manipulation, a bit of exploitation that takes place. So actually, if you think of discourse as genre and discourse as professional practice, then of course they have some kind of a common area of expertise, which I put it as socio-pragmatic constraint. You can go a little bit further. Discourse as social practice. Now here we are not talking about genres. We're talking about discourses in general. Now, for example, two people talking to each other, casual talk. And if you want to analyze that, then of course, yes, it is the social interaction you're talking about, and you are entirely within a social space, and all you need is social knowledge. What sort of social knowledge? That if two people are talking, then there are ways of communicating with each other. Not two people speak at the same time. This is part of a social understanding. When you're talking, then of course one person speaks at a time. And then the topics that you normally raise and the kinds of things that you talk about, they are in a way interrelated or contextually related or similar. You cannot talk about three entirely different things in a matter of 1 minute and switch topics, at random. You don't do that. So there are social practices we don't want to talk about. That is not the area I'm interested in. So when we talk about genre, I'm particularly interested in the middle circle, socio-pragmatic space. So if you look at the bottom side, you have a textual practice. And if you look at the top end, it is socio-critical perspective. And of course, in between, in the middle, you have professional practice. And genre theory particularly focuses on professional practice. And on the other hand, you have a discursive practice, which means discursive practice, what I mean is how people write, the practice of writing. Now, writing simply doesn't mean that you have to write a text. You may probably be speaking the way I am doing it. I'm performing a discursive practice, but at the same time, I'm working within a professional practice because I'm talking about a professional discourse as professional practice. As an academic, this is a very typical practice for people or to professors to talk about, give lectures on these days, online lectures, webinars, and things of that kind. And then there are social purposes, social practices, which are, beyond our concern at this stage. Now, given that kind of background, I don't want to give you more theory. There's a lot more, but I don't want to give you at this stage. I'll talk about it a little bit more tomorrow when I give you another talk, second session. So at the moment, that is all the theory I want you to understand. Now, the next question that arises is, how do we analyze? How do we practice this theory? How do we make use of this kind of understanding in order to analyze genre? And I want to take up a very unfamiliar genre, which many of us may not probably be aware of as it exists, although we might have seen all of them. And what I call, or what is socially in society, society has actually a way of giving names to these genres. But these names are not given all of a sudden. These names are given over a period of time. Genre names are created over a long period of time, maybe 10 years, 20 years. Why? Because you have to have a common understanding, a shared understanding of communicative purposes amongst all the members of the, or most of the members of a particular community. So if you all of a sudden say, I want to give this text a particular name to this particular genre, then of course, other people may not be aware of it, and it will not be conventionalized. It may not be standardized. It may probably take a long time to do it. And to give you some understanding of that, there is a very interesting book written by Charles Baseman. And what he did was he traced the birth of what we know today so commonly is the research article, journal research article. The journal articles were not created overnight. And he goes to 1920s and 1930s, the time of Newton and other people. And in the beginning, when he traced their history, he discovered that in the beginning, when these people were doing research, they had no way of writing. There were no conventions of writing. So they were writing in the form of individual letters, communicating with friends and colleagues. Look, this is what I did the other day, and this is what I found. And the other person will respond saying, oh, that is interesting. I did this something like this, and I found something different. So they used to communicate and spread knowledge through letters. It was only after about 20, 30 years, the research article was invented, a research report was invented, and the name was given. And later on, the journals were established. So it has a long history. So what I mean is, when we talk about conventions, when we talk about standardizations, when we think about the names given to these genres, they are conventionalized, and conventions take a long period of time to get known, to get shared by members of a particular community. If you're not a member of a particular community, then of course, you may not have any understanding of that. So let us take actually an unfamiliar genre, of course, which is now known as book blurbs. Imagine that you have never heard of the name book blurb, and you want to analyze examples of that. You have to acquire some kind of knowledge about this genre. Where do you get it from? These days, it's very easy. These days, you just go to Google and it gives you practically everything. Anything that you need, you get knowledge about that. But some 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago, there was no Google. And people had to go to dictionaries, people had to do all kinds of research, go to the library, spend a lot of time in order to find out what book blurb is like. And this is what, if you do that, then this is what you get. Origin of blurbs. It was originated in 1907 by an author named Gale Burgess. He was writing a comic book, and on the jacket of the comic book, he embellished a drawing of multitudinous young lady, a fat, attractive, very, very romantic looking, young lady, whom he facetiously dubbed as Miss Belinda Blurb. So he had this picture of this lady, and he called it, she is Miss Belinda Blurb. That was the name given to her. And then what happened? In 1914, after several years, he defined blurb as such. People asked him, why do you call her blurb? And he says, because blurb is a flamboyant advertisement, an inspirational testimonial, which is full of praise. As it sounds like a publisher on the jacket of the latest fiction, we find the blurb. Any book today, if you take any book, then on the book jacket, particularly the back side, the back page, you find a blurb. And the blurb is written in agile adjectives, abundance of adjectives and adverbs, attesting that this book is the sensation of the year, which means it's a kind of an advertisement. So blurb is seen as a kind of advertisement for a book which is always published on the jacket of the book, the back side of the book. Okay, that is one interpretation. There are more modern interpretations. For example, Birchfield in 72, he says a brief descriptive paragraph or note of the contents or characters of a book printed as a commendatory advertisement on the jacket or wrapper of a newly published book. These days, they are very common. Anywhere you find books and you go to the back of the book first, because that gives you a brief introduction to what the book is all about. So it can be considered as a kind of brief advertisement. Much later, Longman's Dictionary of Mass Media says commendatory publicity release or advertisement, one which is often inordinate in its praise or boosting of a new subject, also called a puff piece. The blurb is a puff piece, which means fulsome in praise. You always talk about good things about the book, as you do in advertising, and it often appears on a book jacket. So now you know what we are talking about. We're talking about a genre which is known as book blurbs, which is published on the jacket, the back side of the book, and it gives some introduction of the content of the book. And of course, it is very commendatory, can be seen as an advertisement. Okay, now let us look at now as a genre. We give it a context. So what do we understand now? What's the communicative purpose? The communicative purpose is to describe and evaluate the book. And how? Because you want to influence future actions, attitudes, and judgments of the readers. You write it because you know the people will go to the back of the book first, and you want to influence their future actions so that they can buy your book. They get attracted by your book. Their attitudes change, and they make a judgment about buying a book or not buying a book. That is the purpose of the blurb. Situation, what kind of situation? The message needs to be brief, effective, and adequate to fit the constraints of a book jacket. When you talk about book jacket, there's limited space. And you can't write too much, because the moment you write too much in small print, then of course, the readers will lose interest in it. When they go to a bookshop, several books, they pick up one, they hardly have a few, maybe a minute or two to read it. So you have to write your message in such a way that it is effective, it is brief, and it is adequate so that it can be contained on the book jacket. Now, an important part of contextual configuration is participants. Who are the participants? Now, that is a real mystery. It wasn't then in early days, but these days, today, it is mysterious because we are living in a promotional culture. Everything is being advertised. everything is being recommended or downgraded, or probably there's so much of competitive environment. Different products of the same kind are thrown at us, and it all depends on how you present yourself. So that raises an interesting question because it's an advertisement. So who are the real writers of blurbs? Is it the author who has written the book? Because the author is probably the best person to write because he knows what he has written. Or think of the other side. If the author writes an advertisement for his own book, there is the question of trust, whether the readers will trust him, because you always appreciate your own book. For you, it is probably the best book in the world. So very rarely, in fact, in almost every case, I haven't seen any author writing the blurb, or at least it is not presented the writer as a reader, the writer of the book as the writer of the blurb. It is generally put there on behalf of the publisher, or the publisher does it on behalf of the author. So, but the publisher may not probably have a good idea of the value of the book. So what they normally do is, that is something which is quite interesting. They ask the writer to write an introduction to the book. And then they take some parts of it and then put it as blurb. So that is the trick that most people follow. Medium, it's mainly written. It allows the writer to develop topics, arguments as fully as necessary. The reader's point of view is that the written medium reflects avoidance of textual patterns. Now, what happens is when you are writing, you can't write in a very complex and difficult manner unless you have a very specific audience in mind. So there are ways of writing it. You don't repeat too much because you have limited space. You don't actually write in a very complicated, convoluted metaphors, which need quite a bit of unpacking in order to understand. So the channel has some effect on how these things are written. The content, that is actually a very important thing. To a large extent, it is influenced by the subject matter of the book. You don't write the blurb of a blurb for a detective storybook the same way as you do for an academic book. You don't write the blurb the same way for a classic by a very well-established author, the same way as you do by a novice writer, a new writer, a person who writes his first book. So the content all depends on the book, and we'll give you examples. Now, it'll be quite interesting to see how the content determines. Now, let us take an example, one example. And the example I've taken is The Empire of Fear, Brian Stableford. Now, I'll give you a minute to read it. It's a magnificent epic set in an exotic empire, moving from 17th to 20th century and from England to Africa, Malta, America. The Empire of Fear is a hugely ambitious alternate history. It is about alternate history set in a world which diverged from our own when Attila and the Hun established an empire ruled by vampire aristocracy. This is the kind of thing you're talking about, and it goes on. Now, let us look at it more closely now. The kinds of words and phrases are predominant. It's a typical combination of promotional and descriptive elements. Note particularly the nature of range of adjectives. It depends on the nature of the book that we talked about a minute ago. Like, it talks about a magnificent epic set in an exotic empire. It has some kind of an eerie feeling about it, as if something which is beyond the experience of most people today. It's hugely ambitious alternate history. It's not history, it's alternate history. An astonishing array of colorful characters. Everything is so attractive, but in a mysterious manner. Crossing the genres between fantasy, science fiction, historical fiction, and Gothic horror. So the kinds of things they talk about. So you still wonder, what is it? How do you classify this? The Empire of Fear is a fabulous adventure. It provides a fascinating exploration of a culture. So consider, there are adjectives, there are adverbs, predominantly, as you do in advertising. But the typical narrative form also depends on the nature. Now look at the narration. The story begins in 17th century London. After his bizarre death, Edmund's son Noel flees London, moving from medieval superstition into an age of science and reason. And it goes on like this, as if, unfolding a story. You remember the narrative, the story, from even, whenever you were a child, probably you listened to your grandmas, telling you a story. Once upon a time, something happened, and then after this, it happened, and after this. That's how narration normally goes. And you have a similar kind of description here. The story begins in the 17th century. And of course, yes, there is an attempt to establish the credentials of the author. Brian Stableford is a preeminent science fiction critic, and his other books are listed to influence your decision that you are not reading a novice writer. You are reading a very well-established author. So this is how it is done. Now, let us take one more example from a very different discipline now. The discipline that we are part of, at least I am part of, discourse analysis. Now, this is a book which is titled An Introduction to Discourse Analysis, written by James Paul G. And he's a professor of reading at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And this is what? If you look at the first paragraph, you have, if you only read one book on discourse analysis, this is the one to read. G shows us that discourse analysis is about a lot more than linguistic study. It is about how to keep from, as he says, getting physically, socially, culturally, and morally bitten by the world. And it's written not by the author, it's written by Ron Scollin, an old colleague of mine from Hong Kong, but he went to Georgetown University later on, and he was the one who wrote a kind of review, a brief review, a kind of endorsement that you normally find in advertising. And then, of course, yes, there's a description of the book. Now, let us look at the words and phrases, typical grammatical patterns used here. Look at this: unique integrated approach to discourse analysis, analysis of written and spoken English, enact social and cultural perspectives and identities, a theory of language in use, as well as methods of research. Method is a set of tools of inquiry alongside the theory of language in use, and it goes on. If you look at these are again adjectives, abundance of nominal phrases and adjectives, but the nature of adjectives is so very different from the Empire of Fear. This has more like an academic book. Now, this shows that the audience for this kind of book is restricted. These are the people who are only interested in academic works. People working, researchers people working in discourse analysis, a very specific area, and they are addressing some of those people. So they can actually get away with the kind. But if you look at the nature of patterns, the nature of words and phrases that are used, they are actually same grammatical category. Abundance of adjectives and adverbs, but the nature of these adjectives and adverbs so different from the earlier one. Now, how it is organized, let us see. Organization of this. Now, that is interesting part of it. It has a headline. It has endorsement, as we read, by Ron Scollin. Then there is an attempt to appraise the book, assuming no prior knowledge of linguistics. It's previewing. You can preview it. Some indication of, the book, and then you describe it in more detail, indicating the value of the book. And then you also identify the market. Who are the people who are likely? Because this is, if you can think of this has been slightly longish, small print. The author can get away with it because it is addressing academics. It's addressing people who are interested in discourse analysis, a very specific audience. This is not meant for masses. On the other hand, if you were to write a blurb for a fiction, a novel, or a drama, or collection of poems, you'll write it very differently. And you will not probably have such a huge list of things to do. So it all depends on the kinds of book that you are writing the blurb for. You target the market, and ultimately you establish credentials of the author. That is the last thing that you normally do. Sometimes people do it at the bottom, right now, at the beginning, right in the beginning, people can do that. So there is no way that you can say it always has a fixed pattern, not necessarily. Okay. Now look at the genre of blurb now. We're not talking about individual examples now. Now we are talking about most of the examples that we have found. And what we have done is, this structure is based on hundreds of examples of book blurbs from various, sources, various disciplines, and different ways of writing. So all of them, on the basis of that, you always have a headline to attract readers. You justify the book. How do you justify the book? You establish the field, the area of activity. It said, in this case, it said discourse analysis, and that said it's an alternate history. Sometimes you establish a niche for yourself, that this kind of book is unique, as is done in the endorsement. If you have to read only one book on discourse analysis, then this is it. You appraise the book. How do you appraise it? You present a preview, you describe the book, you indicate the value of the book. So these are 3 stages, 3 steps you take when you appraise the book. And of course, you establish credentials and then endorsement. Now, endorsements can be anywhere. It can be at the bottom of the blurb, it can be beginning of the blurb, it can be on the sides or anywhere. Now, that is something very interesting about blurbs, the way blurbs are organized. When they are organized, they do not follow any particular linear model. And of course, you target market. So these are what we call 6 possible moves. We call them moves. You can call them stages. You can call them steps, whatever. So there are 6 moves. In genre theory, we call them moves. If you do this, then you have to do this, then you have to do this, then you do this, then you do this. So these are the different rhetorical moves that you follow in order to describe a particular structure of the genre. Now, a few general comments. You don't find in every blurb all the moves, the ones I have written. All of them you may not probably find in every blurb. It all depends on how people do it. But a majority of them will have something of this, and some of them may probably be missing. So there are moves which are central, for example, describing the book or indicating the value of the book, or establish the field is central. Establishing credential is very necessary. Endorsement are not necessary. So there are certain moves which are central, certain moves which are peripheral. People may not have. Even the structure or the recurrence or embedding of moves, the sequence may not probably be the way we have talked about. People can actually have in different sequence. Sometimes, a move may probably be disconnected. Part of this will come in the beginning and part of this will probably come towards the middle. The relationship, now that is the most important thing now. The questions, if we analyze this as a text, and if we analyze this as a genre, then we are saying that we are analyzing genre. But we should not forget that this reminds us of a number of other genres which are similar to this. We have already mentioned advertising. We are familiar with advertising, and book blurbs are probably similar to advertising in certain sense, in certain ways. In some sense, they are similar to promotional letters. The letters that you find. Could you please keep yourself on mute? So there could be some relationship with promotional letters. The letters that you normally get in the email, or maybe perhaps in a letter form in the post, advertising products. There is something common. Even to some extent, there are similarities between blurbs, advertisements, and job applications. What exactly do you do in job applications? You're trying to sell your expertise. You're trying to promote your expertise, whatever expertise you have, whatever qualifications you have, whatever background you have. In a way, you're trying to sell your services to a prospective employer. Is there some kind of a connection? Matter of investigation. But you do actually find a number of other genres which are similar to this. Are they very different? Are they very much separate without any overlap? Or is there an overlap? Now that is something which we need to go further. When we think of genre analysis, but we want to go at some other kind of genres which are related to this. And that will probably come under critical genre theory. We will probably go to that tomorrow in more detail. But let us look at these other related genres, which are not exactly like promotions or promotional or advertising, not exactly like blurbs. What about book reviews? They have elements of promotion in some sense, advertisements, but they are also criticisms in it. Whereas book blurbs, they only talk about the good things of the book. Whereas book reviews, they talk about good and bad things about the book, the weaknesses of the book, the strong elements of the book. But there is still some kind of overlap, some kind of interesting relationship. What about various forms of academic introductions, like a preface, introduction, foreword, or acknowledgement? These are called academic introductions. Most of the books will have a preface. They will have an introduction. Some of them will probably have a foreword, and some of them will have acknowledgement. All these are, in some sense, remotely, though, connected with book blurbs or advertising. So the thing is, when we actually look at any kind of discourse or genre, we want to analyze it. It is not enough to focus just on one kind of genre. Although if you do that, then of course, yes, you will get good, interesting findings, insights. But if you want to do more, and if you want to go further and see the relationship, and the relationship is not simply that, the relationship is how do you appropriate, how do you borrow something that people in advertising do in order to write a book review, or in order to write an academic introductions, or any form of introductions. So you always go to the nearest genre, which is related, closely related, remotely related, or whatever. So you look at that, how this is done there, and then you follow, you appropriate. Appropriate means to borrow, and appropriate is not a negative term. Appropriate simply means, you can legitimately borrow something which other person has written or which is available. I remember the first time, and this was about more than 15 years ago, or maybe more than that, I was asked to write an academic autobiography of mine. There was a book to be published, which they said will give the stories of academics, their success in the academy, in the publication industry, how they succeeded in getting established as an author. And they actually particularly had people who were from second language learning context and different disciplines. They had scientists, an accountant, they had a business specialist, they had marketing person, they had linguists, discourse analysts, so many people. And when they asked me to write this, the question in my mind occurred, I've never actually written my autobiography. And this is an academic autobiography. I'm not talking about my personal life. I'm talking about my life as an academic. What sorts of things I went through? What sorts of problems I found? How did I overcome those problems? How did I get established in the academy or in the published world? So my first reaction was, let us see what people do in biography, autobiographies. So you go to the nearest, which is close to what you are doing, and then see, okay, this is what people do. Now I want to make use of this to write an academic biography. And that's how it was done. So these things do actually contribute. Because they have relationship, you actually take advantage of what is the nearest genre that you are interested in. Okay. Other interesting features of lexicogrammar, if you want to study, and then you'll find interesting patterns: promoting books and promoting cosmetics. Advertising for cosmetics or advertising for books. Is there a comparison? Is there an overlap? Are there any differences? Book descriptions in blurbs and reviews. Adjectives in academic books and in thrillers. So what's the nature? What's the difference between academic books and academic thrillers or thrillers, fictional. Book descriptions in technical subjects, how they describe books in technical subjects and in fiction. Very interesting to compare. But they have relationships. In terms of grammatical categories, they are similar. But in terms of semantics, they're different. In terms of effect, they're different. So these actually give you very interesting topics to explore further, to analyze further. Strategies in promoting classics and books by new authors. How do you promote Shakespeare and a novice author, a new author? How do you promote Milton and a book of poems written by a local artist, poet? Similarly, strategies to promote classical fiction and detective fiction. How do you describe actually the story in classical stories and detective stories? How do you make it interesting? So these are valid questions, valid areas of further description. Okay, so much for unfamiliar genres. So if you think of genre, as I said, it is identified in terms of communicative purposes, which are achieved through the rhetorical processes of narration. You narrate, you describe, you explain, you evaluate, instruct, and things of that kind. These are the generic values, or some people call it actually, the narrative genres or big genre, mega genres. And then you have a colony of genres, which I call promotional genres. And then you get genres, different genres. Book blurbs is a genre, book review is a genre, advertisement is a genre, sales letters a genre, job applications are genres, and there's so many others. You can go on, and we have talked about the related ones. Let us look at advertisements now. Advertisements could be TV commercials, print advertisements, radio advertisements, if you classify them in terms of the medium, the spoken medium or the visual or the written version. And if you look at print advertisements and identify them in terms of products, then you can have computer ads, you have book ads, airline ads, car ads, or cosmetic ads. All of them are advertisements, print advertisements, and they are classified in terms of product. You can further classify this. Take airline ads and classify them in terms of audience, different audiences. Vacation advertisements for airlines and ads for business travelers, they're entirely different, very, very different. Although all of them are advertisements, but depending upon the audience, you use your strategies, you use your words and phrases, which will attract people who go on vacation and people who are business travelers. And these ads, the way they are written. So you can see there is an overlap. When you are analyzing a genre, you are not analyzing a particular example. You are analyzing a class of communicative genres, a group of genres, because they have relationships across everywhere. So even if you take one airline ad and you take 10 examples, 20 examples, you will probably find they are from different audiences, different medium, and they are related in different ways. The strategies are different. So analyzing genre is a very interesting and effective way of looking at how texts are written, how the texts are consumed and communicated to specific audiences. Now, the remaining time that I have, I will take the prime example, which has actually changed the nature of world we live in today. That is advertisements. How do we view advertisements? What sorts of things? It is very attractive simply because this has been changing every day. The way advertisements are done, the way they are designed, and the way they are thrust upon us. It was not for nothing that Pecco described some time ago. He said, we are living in a promotional world, promotional culture. Our culture is promotional. We are living in an advertising world. There's hardly anything which is not advertised. And so much of money, resources, time is spent on advertisements. So let's look at advertisements. Now, I'm wondering whether you want to have a break for about 5 minutes or shall we continue? Yes, do I get an indication? Silvana?
Yes, okay.
Shall we take a break or shall we continue?
Oh, yes. Maybe you must be very tired, Prof. Speaking, most.
Okay, let's have a break for 5 minutes. Okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Okay.
lovely.
5 minutes, lovely.
Yeah.
Dear participants, you can address your questions to Professor Bhatia through this chat box. Yeah, thank you.
Let me check.
Shall we start?
Yes, Prof.
Yes, okay. Lovely. So let us look at another exponent of genre, advertisement. It's very attractive simply because advertisements and promotions, they have changed the whole world of discourse. And it has changed so much. And it has made the world interesting for us. There's hardly anything that we do these days which does not involve some form of promotion, some form of advertisements, where you advertise your ideas, you promote your own ideas of various kinds, different kinds of advertisements you find in the world. And it has become part of everything, even academic articles, abstracts that we write, introductions that we write in research articles, they are all a form of promotion in some sense. There's some indication of promotion because that is what people want to do for various things. So let us look at advertisements, the hardcore advertisements. Now, what are advertisements? Advertising is any controlled form of non-personal presentation. It's controlled form of non-personal presentation and promotion of ideas. You promote not simply ideas, you can promote goods, you can promote services by an identified sponsor that is used to inform and persuade the selected market. Think of this, the talk that I'm giving. The way I am presenting it, there is an element, you probably will notice there's some kind of an element of promotion in it, because the way I'm describing genre theory and genre analysis, that indicates very clearly that I've subscribed to this, I find it very attractive, and then I pass it on to other people so that other people can follow. So there is actually an element of promotion, which is part of our culture, everyday work that we do. So advertising also has been seen as a means of communication of a promise. which is informative, educational, and persuasive. So what you do is, through advertisements, you promise a particular audience that this is what you will find if you use, or if you follow my advice, if you follow my product, or if you take my services, this is what you are likely to get. It's informative in the sense that it informs the consumer about the existence of a want-satisfying product or service. You need some kind of service. You're looking for some kind of product, and you need to be informed about it. So this is informative in that sense. It is educational in the sense that it increases consumer knowledge, enhances judgment in the process of reaching or buying a decision. So it enhances your knowledge, consumer knowledge in that sense, and it's persuasive, that it should encourage the reader to try to buy the product or service. That is the ultimate. So advertisements have three characteristics. Jeffrey Leach, very old colleague of mine, who is unfortunately no longer there, he was the first linguist who wrote an entire book actually in 1966 on a linguistic study of advertisements. And he actually said there are four typical aspects of advertisements which are crucial and which are interesting for linguists. It has attention value, which means it draws attention to itself. It has to be attractive. And you can make it attractive by presenting something which is surprising, which is unexpected, and which explains that there is something available. So it has attention value. It should be readable. It must sustain the interest it has attracted. And this is generally done by making the message easy to grasp and assimilate. There's no point in having an advertisement which people don't understand. If it's very complex, then of course it's no good. People won't read it, because these are all unsolicited materials. Unsolicited, you don't ask for it, they are thrust upon you. They are spread all around. They are sent to you on email, and you're watching a video, and then in between it stops and you get one or two advertisements. Go to YouTube, and every 10 minutes you will find a few advertisements, one or two advertisements. So they are unsolicited, unwanted. It has to be memorable, because many a times you don't have the need to buy one, but the advertisers hope that you will remember it maybe for another 6 months, 8 months, or a year. When you really need it, then the mind, it should come to your mind. You should be able to remember, this is what I read some time ago, let's go for it. So memorability is another characteristic. And of course, yes, it should have a selling power. If it doesn't have a selling power, then there's no point in having an advertisement. A range and variation in advertising and promotion. What sorts of things are advertised? You can advertise a product, can advertise a service. Many a times you have goodwill advertising. You're not selling a service or product, but just you want to be in the good books of people, making yourself familiar to people. Advocacy advertising. Oh, even, the lawyers these days in certain countries, they are allowed to advertise. Infomercial. Now that is a very interesting way of looking at it. Infomercials are camouflaged advertisements. They are presented as something else, as information pieces, but they are commercials. You may probably find scientific reports, advertisements in the form of a scientific report. When you look at it, you say, oh, maybe it looks like a science report. But when you read all of it, it's an advertisement. Public service announcements, of course, the hospitals, the government pamphlets and everything, they advertise. And then, of course, political advertising is very common. And the list is not complete. There may be many more forms of advertising. So what I mean to say is our life in various aspects determines or is dependent on promotion and advertising. We indulge in advertising and promoting our own ideas. We at the same time, we are bombarded by, advertisements from all different sources. Now, one of the things which is very typical of hardcore advertisements, although these days it's less common, but it used to be very common, is product differentiation. You differentiate your product from other products of similar kind. And that reminds me of a very old story I read, and I don't know who the writer is, but I read it a long time ago. And that was something very interesting, how people, different sellers, they compete with each other, how they differentiate their products. And the story goes like this. On one of the streets in London, there were two sausage sellers, one on the left-hand side of the road, the other on the right-hand side of the road. One day, the left-hand side of the road, he had a board, a signboard, big signboard on top of his shop, which said, "We sell the best sausages in London." So that was on the left-hand side. The next day, the guy on the right-hand side of the road wanted to outdo him. And he says, well, if he is talking about this, then nobody's going to buy my actually sausages. And he wrote another one, a similar board, which said, "We sell the best sausages in England." Of course, England is much bigger than London. But that was not the end of the story. The next day, the guy on the left-hand side wrote, "We sell the best sausages in the world." Now, best sausages in the world, where can you go beyond this? But the advertisers are very clever. So what the other guy on the right-hand side did on the other side was the following day, "We sell sausages to the Queen." Now, who could be bigger than Queen? But that is not where it ended, because the guy on the left-hand side had a huge placard which simply said, "God save the Queen." That was so interesting. So people do actually differentiate their products. And of course, there are laws now. When you actually compare your product with other products, there are laws, but people have actually strategies to cover those so that they are not implicated in any kind of illegal, advertising. And I'll give you examples in a bit. So product differentiation is the essence of most of these, product advertisements. The strategies have become different. They're not as blatant as you had some 200 years ago. Now, they play with language. That is one of the most interesting thing about advertisements, the way they exploit language. Lexicogrammar. Lexicogrammar means grammatical items and words, phrases, grammatical features, they exploit them. Like they create new ones, like Beauty Floor. It's a cleaning product which keeps your house or floor beautiful. So instead of saying it keeps your floor beautiful, it says Beauty Floor. That's the name given to it. Stroft, for strong and soft. Toilet roll. Peanuttiest, peanut candy. Rice Krispies, the breakfast cereal that went snap, crackle, pop. That's about the cereal. People like, you know, crispy breakfast, and the cereals which snap, crackle, and pop. One of the things which can help them to achieve product differentiation successfully is not to compare your product with others, but what they do is they use terms like help, like, virtual, and things of that kind. These are what they call weasel words. The weasel words are used to evade or retreat from a direct or forthright statement or position. You don't want to take a direct position. So you use these weasel words, like instead of saying this product will keep you young, we say this product helps you stay young. So if it doesn't, then nobody can go to the courts and complain about it. It helps prevent cavities. It doesn't mean that it will prevent cavities, but it helps. It helps keep your house germ-free. These days, in the COVID-19 context, you will find most of the sanitizers, soaps, and all cleaning equipments. So all of them, they have numbers: 97.5% alcohol-free or alcohol, 90% germs-free, 99.9% germs-free, still leave 1% in case they are proved wrong. Similarly, the words like virtual are virtually, which means in effect, but not in fact. The seats in this 1994 Corvette are virtually handmade, virtually handmade. This is a car, and it says seats are virtually handmade. Doesn't mean that they are handmade, but virtually. They look as if they are handmade. Similarly, words like, if you sip Matthews Rose wine, it's like being transported across the Atlantic Ocean. It's like being transported, not actually you will be transported, but it feels like. Ajax cleans like a white tornado. It's like taking a trip to Rome. You set your foot on Alitalia, and it's like taking a trip to Rome, if you see this. Advertisers get a license to make anything possible because of these weasel words. They make things possible which are not possible in reality. Other expressions like are, can be, up to, as much as, tackles, fights, feel, the feel of, looks like, the look of, etc., etc. So they use all these expressions to create some kind of a imaginary world, and they try to misguide people into believing that whatever they are selling is really, or whatever they are saying is really true about the product or service. They also very cleverly compound words, because advertisements, you don't actually write lengthy paragraphs. So what they do is they have to compound these words so that in a limited space, a limited number of noun phrases, they can put in a lot of information, a lot of good, positive information. Yeah, for example, across the room kind of telephone, which is across the room kind of, built-in bedroom at a price you can afford. Built-in bedroom. It simply means there's a bedroom within the same room. Dovetail assembly units, undreamed of savings, space saving in design, day in, day out protection. This is what you will probably find very handy in COVID-19 context. Honey-coated sugar puffs, the best looking small car in the world, the wholesome ready-to-eat cereal. So they actually have compound words very commonly used, typical of advertising. Of course, modifiers, because the whole idea is that they have to modify. Modify simply means adjectives. And the kinds of adjectives which are very, very popular, which are inconceivable. You can't actually have advertisements which has no modifiers. The product has to be best-selling, delightfully different, finest, all brand new, just right, specially and delightfully different, perturbingly moving, etc., etc. Multiple modifiers. Now you have limited space in advertising, and you want to squeeze in as many adjectives as possible in a limited space. And the carriers of these adjectives are noun phrases. So they have noun phrases which packed in as many adjectives as are necessary. And there is no limitation. You can pack in any number of adjectives in a noun phrase, either before the head word or after the head word. Like, look at this, two examples I have. A waxless, shaveless, creamless, painless method of unwanted hair removal. All you're talking about is removal. Removal of what? Hair. What kind of hair? Unwanted. And how do you do it? Painlessly, creamlessly, shaveless, waxless. Or similarly, the world's first packless, cordless, lightweight, compact, integrated video light. How many adjectives? Modifiers, multiple modifiers they're used. Exceptions, sometimes you find in news report headlines, because sometimes newspaper headlines also use this. Like this one from last year in South China Morning Post, I discovered unreliable personality-driven US foreign policy risks. Unreliable personality-driven US foreign policy risks. Chaos due to Donald Trump's coronavirus diagnosis. So people can do that. But when you think of newspaper headlines serve the same purpose, because they have to actually be very brief, and they have to be in terms of what you call phrases rather than sentences. Syntactic innovations. You know how they create new innovations, like gentles the smoke and makes it mild. Gentles the smoke. How can you make smoke gentle? I mean, it's not irritating your eyes. Or it may probably be cigarettes. It gentles the smoke. Where the good life gets rolling, good life gets rolling. Italy begins in Singapore when you step on board Alitalia. So you will find Italy beginning the moment you board the flight Alitalia in Singapore. Delicious then and delicious now. Curls that last and last at last. They play on these words in order to make them attractive, in order for people to stick to it. And they are reminded of that, and they are found attractive. Simplicity, sometimes simplicity is actually very useful, particularly in slogans. Philips, for a long, long time, they had this slogan, simply years ahead. Philips, simply years ahead. And there was another one which says, just slightly ahead of our time. It's got performance down to a science. Our policies are your best insurance. The most convenient way to a soft and silky you. A funeral is for the living. A funeral is for the living. That is something, which is very, very typical in the Western world, where funerals are quite expensive, very, very expensive. People start saving for their funerals, and it actually affects the kind of savings that they have, which is not passed on to the people who live after them. So if you have a reasonable funeral service, which is cheaper, then this was the one which was advertised. A funeral is for the living, for those people who are living. So it transferred some kind of an epithet. Imperatives are very common in advertising. Live life king size, give your baby the Cyrillic advantage. For nearest location, call this, go to work on an egg. This is the egg producing association in England. They advertise, go to work on an egg, take eggs in the morning before you go to your work. They use cliches very often to attract people. The cliches, and they exploit them. How do they do it? Let's take examples. Any similarity is purely coincidental. That is the cliche that is very well known, and most people know it, and people are familiar with it. What they do is they exploit it. Instead of saying coincidental, they say intentional. Any similarity is purely intentional. The sun never sets on the British Empire. That's a cliche. But Lufthansa exploited this by saying the sun never sets on Lufthansa territory. The Shape of Things to Come, a very famous novel, exploited by Mitsubishi for advertising their car, Mitsubishi Cordia. It says the shape of cars to come. Either you are born with it or you don't have it. That is the cliche. But what they say is either you are born with it or you buy it, buy our product. So they are very past masters in exploiting these cliches. First impressions, that's a very common collocation, but they change it into fast impressions. Now look at the structural elements now, how these advertisements are structured. Now this is something very, very, you can say, flexible in advertising, because they actually do not attack, they do not actually play within a linear space. They have a multi-perspective space which is multimodal and multidimensional. So they can actually play with it, with the organization in any way they like. But if you think of the message, then of course you have an illustration, you have a headline, you have a body copy, standing details, and signature line. This is what advertising industry recommends, or they find out. This is typically done by the advertising, you can say, profession. But from the language point of view, let us see what we find. Look at this advertisement. If sonic technology can find the Titanic 2 miles below the ocean, and there is a picture of Titanic in the frozen sea, why not use it to reach plaque bacteria just below the gum line? In 1995, sonic technology swept the ocean floor and unveiled the Titanic. Today, however, sonic technology is used to reach something far more elusive, plaque bacteria. Introducing Sonic Hair Plus. The sonic frequency brushing removes hard to reach plaque bacteria, actually reversing gingivitis, although it moves at 31,000 brush strokes a minute, it's as gentle as a soft manual brush. The result, if you don't have a better checkup after 90 days, we will refund your money. That's as amazing as sonic technology itself. And then there is a picture of Sonic Plus. And then it further says the logo, Sonic Hair, amazing, isn't it? And then the signature line where you can buy it. So if you look at this structure of this, then you have a headline for reader's attraction. You also have an illustration, a picture for reader's attraction. You establish credentials by talking about customers' needs rather than saying that this is the best product you have, as you do in establishing credentials. So two ways of doing it. You talk about what a customer may probably need, and this is a fulfillment of that need or meeting that demand. You establish credentials. There is quite a bit of product detailing. You detail the product, give all the, and evaluate the product as you normally do in promotional elements. The product are illustrated. There is a logo and there's a signature line. So that is what a typical advertisement looks like. So if you, this is hardcore advertising. This is the basic advertising format in written form. And the rhetorical move structure, if you look at it, this is what you find: headlines, targeting the market, justifying the product, detailing the product or service, establishing credentials, endorsement or testimonials, offering incentives. Sometimes you say, yes, we offer you incentives like, okay, if you buy it within this, then you get 10% discount, or on a particular credit card, bank credit card, you will be given additional 10% or 5% off. So you offer all kinds of incentives. And many a times you use pressure tactics. This, offer of 20% discount or 10% discount is valid only up to 31st of October. They put pressure on you so that you can buy it before that date. And then, of course, they always say solicit response. They have signature line and say, please tell us, when you need it, or if you get in touch with us, we'll be there to help you in whatever way you need. But again, as I said, it is a multi-perspective and multi-dimensional space, multimodal space. There are pictures, there are, things which are scattered left, right, and center, can be placed in any way. So it's not a linear space we are talking about. So advertising is actually very, very unique in that sense. So you use the space as best as you can, and people do it very effectively. So this is what advertisement is all about. Now what I want to do is to give you another view of advertising. Modern days, as I said, I was saying that you find innovation. And innovation, there's no end to innovation, as we discovered in the product differentiation story I told you about. So people actually go to extremes. And we are talking about the discourse, we are talking about the organization of discourse, we are talking about everything. But on the other hand, you may probably, partly because of the creative media, partly because of the digital media which is available, and the space which is available on digital media, we find even more interesting, illustrations of advertising. And let me give you, look at the following 3 advertisements and talk about these in your, normally I give it to people to work on, if they want to. Now, what are some of the distinctive features of this form of advertising? Now, compare this advertising to the ones we have talked about. What about this one? This is number 1. What is it, this advertising?
What is it?
Yes. There is something which is in small print: because life makes wrinkles. And this is an advertisement for Nivea cream. Life gives you, wrinkles because your children, growing up children, supporting them, having to build a house for yourself or buying a car, all these things actually, they have effect on your savings, and it gives you wrinkles. The best way to get rid of wrinkles is Nivea cream. So this is an advertisement for Nivea cream. So it is through illustration, visuals, very little. very little, paperwork or verbal words and phrases, bare minimum. That's number one. Number two, moms demand action. This is a different kind of advertisement, social action. Moms demand action. One child is holding something that is banned in America to protect them. Now, what happened was, the one thing which is banned and the other thing which is not banned. What is banned? The gun is not banned, but the other thing is banned. And this is very typical of America. Similarly, one child is holding something that has been banned in America to protect child. Guess which one? It is something that a child is holding in his hand. That has been banned, but not the guns. Similarly, the third one, it is, no, I think I have to blow it up in order to see. Now, that is little red dining, Little Red Riding Hood. Now that has been banned because in this picture, there is a wine bottle held by children, and that has been banned, but the gun hasn't been banned. Now this is what they are advertising, some kind of a moral action. They demand action. So people in America, they know which one has been banned for which reason and which has been banned for which reason. But gun lobby hasn't been banned. So people who are asking for action, this is what they do. So here, it's very untypical of the hardcore advertising that we have talked about. So variation. The third one is this. FedEx. And it's typically, the way it is written. You have a picture, on the top is somebody in China passing on the FedEx parcel to somebody in Australia. And it's as smooth as passing from one person to the other in a jiffy, in a second. And FedEx works like that. So these are the messages we conveyed visually, without any words, without any discourse. But it is a genre. It's a genre of advertising. So when I say advertising has become so very productive, creative, innovative, people do actually innovate a lot in this particular genre. So I think that is where we have to think about advertising in a creative manner. But advertising is advertising, all of them, whether they are in written form, whether they are in classic, or whether they are in any of the multimedia format or digital media, nobody will misunderstand this as an advertising. Nobody will say it is not an advertisement. It's simply because the society has given it name. Secondly, we are living in this particular world, which is full of advertising around us, and all of us are, in a way, confronting these advertisements every day. So we are willing participants. We are actually part of the social community, which actually makes use of advertising, or use in the sense, we are disseminated advertising all over, and we consume them in some form or the other. So this is the shared understanding, which gives us a kind of integrity and identity of all these examples that I've quoted, whether in a very, very written form, detailed written form, with all kinds of, linguistic devices used, or in a visual form where minimal language is used, but there are visuals which are given. Similarly, you may find many of the interesting ones on television. So it is a world which is wide open. This is an area of study which is wide open from the point of view of linguistics and language study. Okay, so that's where I stop. And
Yes, there are questions.
there are questions. Okay. Yes.
In the section.
There are
Yes.
some questions, Prof, in the chat box.
Oh, in the chat box. Oh,
Please read, Laru Yusuf.
Yeah. Okay, Prof, the first question, Prof, from Marco.
can somebody
Pito
read
Paget.
it? Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, Prof. Okay. The first question is from Marco Pitoyo Paget. I'd like to ask, if possible, do you think that students with low mastery of English can use critical genre analysis for their thesis?
For their thesis, why not?
Okay, so the answer is why not?
Why not? Yes. And provided their interest is in some form of communication that they want to understand, they want to analyze. It is basically on some kind of a genre which they want to understand, some kind of professional practice, or some kind of mindset of a professional that you want to understand and they're going to want to analyze. There are actually people who are doing, I have already examined something like about 20 to 30 PhD theses on critical genre theory in different contexts. And there are lots of people who are doing it, yes. It's about 5-10 years ago. I started talking about it about 10 years ago. But the book I wrote was only in 17, although the book got about 2 years to write. So I think it has a history of about 8 to 10 years. And I've done a number of projects on critical genre theory, using critical genre theories, getting data. And there's a lot of publications, more than about, maybe hundreds of publications now. What they do is they don't actually, not all of them actually use critical genre theory, naming it as critical genre theory, but the combining other theories, because the critical genre theory basically believes in multiplicity of methods, multi-perspective analysis. It's a multi-perspective. So people combine critical genre theory with critical discourse analysis, combined with corpus linguistics. They combine this with a number of other narrative, analysis and things of that kind. So people can combine, people do combine, because the basis is multi-perspective. I'll talk about this tomorrow. It's a multi-perspective methodology.
Thank you, Prof. I think that that is to answer question number 1 and number 2 from Raihan also. I would like to ask, can you suggest us what kind of text suitable for our analysis? So it will be answered tomorrow, yeah, Prof, yeah, for tomorrow's presentation.
Yes, tomorrow I can give you, the kinds of, any kind of text which you think is, conventionally written is suitable for. I normally don't restrict people to, when I was teaching and I still teach, I ask students, I let them loose on the world. I said, go to the world, find examples. Now, when they're traveling on the train, they find something which is written in some kind of a picture or some kind of a warning written somewhere. They click on that and they bring it back to the classroom and say, okay, this is what kind of genre is this? And how do we describe it? And what are the typical characteristics? So the world is full of genres. The world is full of genres. In fact, most of the texts that you find, most of the conventional communications that you find, they are all some instances of genre. And you can analyze them. The theory allows you to do that.
Okay.
There are no limits.
Okay, Prof.
The second
Yes,
one to Yusuf. How about social
Yeah.
media advertisement? Is it possible?
Social media, yes, that is relatively new, but people are still doing it. Yes, social media, because in social media, you have to establish the genre first.
Yes.
Email, for example, some people believe that it is a genre, but if you describe in terms of communicative purpose, it is not a genre because it can serve several communication unless you think of it in more general terms. Otherwise, email is a medium. Email is a medium.
Yes, that's
So
true.
I think there is, yes, there is a little bit of work. Similarly, when you talk about blogs, the blogs are possible. The blogs can be established as a genre, and number of other things. Websites can be actually genre. So all these social media, things, WhatsApp messages, and these are more diverse. It's a little bit, unless they get established. At the moment, they are not. But there are people who are actually working on these things.
Yeah.
Okay. Very
Next
interesting.
question, Prof.
Yes.
From Melanie. As we know, in advertising, we sometimes add copy to make the people can get the meaning of the advertisement. Then there is someone told me that copy for advertising is better to be concise. So what is the most important thing in writing copy to make the advertisement copy, concise, and clear? Thank you.
Copy, concise, and clear. You mean the message?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, the message. I mean, look, the analysis that I did, they're all linguistic resources that were exploited in order to make it precise, in order to make it succinct, in order to make it effective. Now, these are the linguistic devices that people are using. And there is no end to this. All you have to do is, if you're a good user of language, then you will know, okay, there are 3 ways of saying this, which is most effective, which is more concise, which is more clear. So that is the decision that the copywriter has to make. And mind you, it's not easy to do it because advertising industry, they earn a lot of money and they charge a lot of money. Any product that you buy in the market and you pay, say, $10 for a particular product. Now, out of $10, 5 or 6 of them, they go for advertising. Everything, every time you buy. So almost about 30 to 40% of the price you pay, it goes to advertising and packaging. And it's not simple for them to write an advertisement. No, what they do is they don't write a single advertisement. They normally write advertising campaigns, which means there will be about 8 or 10 or 7 or 8 different advertisements, some for the media, television media, some for oral, some for newspaper, some for different kinds of magazines, addressing different audiences, different kind of cultures, different countries. So they actually make lots of advertisements. So these are campaigns. If you want to look at it, the interesting thing would be if initially, if you look at very early on, there was an advertising campaign from Apple computers. They have a number of them and they're very, very interesting. They will probably be available on the web if you want to go for that. That's quite interesting.
Thank you. Okay, Yusuf. Serudi ada nggak? Halo?
Yes?
Serudi ada? Is there Ibu Dekan ada? Ibu Dekan?
I think Bodekan is here, ma'am. Bodekan here also.
Yeah, maybe Bu Dekan want to greet Prof. In
Well, if you don't have
Hello.
now, you can ask questions tomorrow.
Okay.
I'll still be there.
Okay. So I just want to to say so much, Prof. Vijay. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Really,
Thank you.
yeah,
It's a pleasure.
we truly appreciate the time for you to share your experience, your lecture today. It's really a very interesting lecture. I like to have a new term for that we know. Usually we only know genre analysis, and now the term is critical genre analysis. That is a really interesting one.
Well, if some
So,
people who,
yeah.
some people who are interested, they may probably think attend it'll
See you
thank
tomorrow.
you.
Yeah?
Okay, see you tomorrow,
See you
same
tomorrow.
time.
Bye bye.
Will there be a separate link or the same link?
Oh yes.
There will be
Okay.
separate
Should
link.
be a different link. Yes, I guess there should be a
Different
different.
link.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you very much,
Bye
Bye
bye.
Prof.
bye. Thank you. Bye bye.